Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. It's a pleasure to welcome you. My name is Georgina Curto. I'm a senior researcher and team lead at the United Nations University Institute in Macau, dedicated to digital technology for the sustainable development for the SDGs. And in this session, I will be moderating. And the speakers of this session, I have the honor to welcome my colleagues Kiyoshi Adachi and Elena Afonso from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in Geneva. So I will briefly introduce both of them. So Kiyoshi Adachi is a legal officer on investment policy reviews at the investment policy review section of the Division on Investment and Enterprise at the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in Geneva, as I mentioned before. He conducts research, analysis, and policy recommendations on topics related to investment on development and the SDGs. Prior to that, he also worked at the UN in positions in New York and Vienna. And he holds a Juris Doctor from UCLA School of Law in Los Angeles. And he's also admitted to the bars of Pennsylvania and the District of Columbia. So he has a Master's of Public Administration focusing on development management. In addition to his duties at the UN, he teaches also international law at the Hosei University in Tokyo. And my colleague, Elena Afonso, is an economic affairs officer at the investment policy review section of the Division on Investment and Enterprise at the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in Geneva. She's an economic researcher on investment policy and foreign direct investment and investment promotion and facilitation. She has over 10 years experience in economic research and policy analysis on international trade and international collaborating with international organizations in Africa, Europe, and the US. She has both graduate and undergraduate degree in economics, focusing on development. So before I give the floor to Kiyoshi, I would like to highlight that from the UNU Macau, it's very important for us to discuss not only digital technology and AI, from a technological point of view, from the development point of view, from the ethical point of view, but also today and in this seminar series, from the economic point of view. And just citing Kiyoshi comment here at the UNU AI conference, it's important to know where the money goes in the digital economy, which is a flourishing sector, as they will explain, and it has a huge impact and can have both very positive and also negative impact if we don't manage it properly in the sustainable development and the SDGs. So having said all that, I'm really eager to hear the explanations from Kiyoshi and Elena. So Kiyoshi, the floor is yours. Um, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Georgina. Well, on behalf of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, I would like to begin by, of course, thanking both UNU Macau and Georgina personally for hosting us at this online workshop. Welcome to everybody who is online. I know you have a very good relationship with UNU Macau. Just a little bit of background before I actually start. Yeah, uh, Earlier this year, the UNCTAD as the focal point for foreign direct investment issues in the UN system conducts research and analysis on a whole range of issues related to what we call FDI, all right, foreign direct investment. And I'll get to these terms in a second. But every year we come out with an annual report that basically tracks FDI going from one country to another. All right. And this year's report, hope everyone can see this, is focuses on as you can see in the subtitle, International Investment in the Digital Economy. Okay. Um, uh, we were fortunate enough to be able to present some of the findings of this report earlier in October this year at the AI conference hosted by UNU Macau. And um, uh, you know, I'll talk a little bit about what we said there because I think it's important context for what we're going to say today. And I mentioned there that we're going to be focusing on the policy side in this session. But in order to understand the policy side, I think it's also important to understand some of the data that underlies it. All right. Now, before I go ahead and start with our PowerPoint presentation, um, I think it's important to because we're not necessarily talking to an audience who is normally involved in investment issues. What we mean by foreign direct investment and some of the terminology that we on UNCTAD side typically use. Right? I guess the first distinction that I would like to raise is, the question of what do we actually mean by foreign direct investment? All right. And by foreign direct investment, I think the best way to contrast that is with portfolio investment. So if you buy stocks in Apple on the stock exchange, that's usually a portfolio investment, right? You're buying it. You don't take any management position. You just buy it because you think the stock's price is going to rise, right? Um, by contrast, foreign direct investment means that an investment in which you're not only taking, ownership shares of companies, you're also involved actively in managing it. It's typically, for example, what a venture capital firm does, right? It helps start up the company, takes an ownership share, puts board members on takes a few positions on the board in order to actively manage that firm. So, this is the contrast between what we mean by direct investment and portfolio investment. The other two terms that I think that'll come up in my presentation is the distinction between greenfield and brownfield investment. Okay. Greenfield investment means investment in something absolutely new. So if you go into another country to set up a factory, for example, that is considered a greenfield investment. If you go in and are simply buying another company, we refer to that an M&A, for example, right? So we refer to that as a brownfield investment. So that's the other distinction, definition-wise, that I think it's useful to explain before we go into the actual slides. All right, so I'll now go into the slides, and I the first 5, 6 slides are going to be a repeat of what we did in Macau, because this is the underlying data. What we're looking at when we talk about investment in the digital economy. Okay. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Can somebody give me? Okay, good. All right. All right. So, we'll start by looking at an overview of the data, all right? And I think the best place to start here, what do we mean? What do we mean by the digital economy? Well, I mean, the digital economy can mean a lot of different things. But the World Investment Report defines it as at 3 levels, right? At the broad scope level, which includes things like digitalized agriculture, digitalized health, digitalized manufacturing, or various types of services. Then we have the narrow scope digital economy, which looks at digital content, various platforms, AI, fintech, e-commerce, things of that nature. And then the core digital economy, which comprises the actual infrastructure. So we're talking about the satellites, right? We're talking about the water, the cable connections, the undersea cable connections. We're talking about data centers and things like that. So, in order to understand where the investment is going, this is generally how we chopped up the digital economy. I'm aware that there are other ways to chop up that digital economy, and it's in the academic literature. But I think it's for our purposes. It was simply so that we could trace where the money is coming from and where the money that's invested is going. Now, we start with the question of who is doing these foreign direct investments, all right? And the answer to that is that largely speaking, it's multinational enterprises. And when we track the changes in invest who is investing, between 2017 and 2015, the interesting thing, for example, is that you see that back in 2017, the number of firms which are investing in the digital economy, the top digital firms in terms of the amount being invested rose, especially for China. Okay, this is the light blue, for where we had two firms in 2017 up to 11 firms in 2017. Um, you know, Others remain roughly the same, but you can see how that's eaten into a good chunk of that share, that of top digital firms in the digital economy that was occupied by the United States. That may not come as a big surprise to you, but I think to actually see the data is somewhat eye-opening as well. Now, where is that money going? Well, you know, it is actually going into only a few countries, especially in the developing world. We can see that a lot of it is going to, these top 10 countries in the developing world: India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, Mexico, China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and Thailand. Okay. And this is by project announcements between 2020 and 2024. Um, so where is it coming from? Well, not surprisingly, it's coming from where those multinational enterprises are located. So you have the United States with that largest chunk, followed by Taiwan and then China, then Singapore, Korea, Japan, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, UK, and France. Right? So, that gives you a little bit of an indication as to where the money is coming from and where it is going. Now, in what is that money going into? In what is that money going into? All right. So when we talk about the question of, in what it is, the investment is going into, we look at greenfield investment, right? And um, we see actually that with respect to greenfield investment, um, a lot of that is going into digital services solutions, and then a lot of that is going into data centers. Okay. Well, now, why, you know, and again, as far as ICT manufacturing is concerned, again, it's very, very concentrated. It's either going to the developed countries or it's going into Asia. Again, this is 2020 to 2024 data. So, the main recipients in Asia have been India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Singapore. Um, if we look at the trends for the sectors in on the whole, we also see that, up until the pandemic, and especially in the first years of the pandemic, you see a huge increase in the investments going into the technology sector. That's perhaps not surprising. And then, once the pandemic peaks out, you see the decline, and again, it's heading up again, now in 2024. Okay. Contrast that to other sectors, and you see that, you know, um, you know, post 2021, the private equity investment has dropped off quite a bit in various other sectors. Now, why does that matter? Why that matters largely because, and I said this when I was in Macau. Um, it matters because we need to look at the data, and then from people who work in development, right? We need to think whether, you know, is this, you know, is where the money is flowing, what we want it to be? Is it meeting our development objectives? This is the question that needs to be posed. And um, you know, yeah, that's, it's not necessarily for us because we're not really, tech experts or digital experts as such. We are people who deal with investment issues largely, right? So because of that, um, because this is private investment, it moves at a different type of dynamic, or at least different drivers. There are different drivers to private investment as opposed to, let's say, ODA or development loans. Yes, investment has been consistently um, um, known to be an important uh, source of financing for development. It's been recognized repeatedly in the financing for development outcome documents every time they meet multilaterally for that, including most recently this year in Seville. But because the dynamics of investment differ a bit, and because it's more it's private sector driven, the one thing that you can do is to try to steer that towards goals that are going to contribute more to a country's development objectives. Now, um, that is the long introduction and largely what I covered when I was at the AI conference in Macau. From here on out, we're going to talk about policies that countries have adopted that contribute to leveraging increased amounts of foreign investment for the purpose of development, whether that's bridging the digital divide or meeting the SDGs. All right. And the starting point for this analysis is this nice little graph here. Okay. Now, this figure basically highlights the correlation between, policies and, FDI. Okay. The the this axis, the vertical axis shows FDI and the digital economy, and the bottom axis, the shows the policy score, right? The horizontal axis shows the policy score. The policy score here refers to some data that we received from the ITU. They have something called the ICT Regulatory Tracker. They've got something called the G5 benchmark, which basically measures the regulatory maturity of countries in the IT sectors. All right. And when we plot, investment against the policy scores, our FDI data against UNCTAD FDI data against the policy scores of the IT sector as you know as provided by the ITU, we see that there is a correlation. Countries that are more regulatorily mature tended to attract increased levels of FDI, right? Um, and that was our starting point. Okay. Now, the second thing that we did was that we went back then and see which developing countries are at this high end at this high end of this graph. All right. And in these developing countries, we found 15 countries that performed really well in terms of both the policy score and FDI attraction. And the analysis that we are presenting from here on out deals with findings of commonalities of the policy environment between, amongst these 15 countries. And those countries are Armenia, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Kenya, Mexico, Nigeria, Rwanda, Pakistan, Peru, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Africa, Thailand, and Turkey. In alphabetical order, not necessarily in order of the amount of investment they're attracting, simply in alphabetical order. These were the countries that we were looking at. We went back and took a look at what kind of policies did they have, and we sort of we felt that it if we did a deeper dive into those policies, we could learn something about how they were able to leverage FDI to better pursue their development objectives. Okay. Um, so um, So basically, we found that there's a fair range of policies that are relatively common to these 15 countries. Yeah. And I'll talk about, the first few of them, especially the shaping the foundations part, and Helena's going to talk about the stimulating investment and fostering impact part. Yeah. So on the shaping the foundations part, we found that most of these countries have digital, and I'll go into these in detail, but they have regional, national, and sectoral digital strategies. They have policies and laws concerning data governance, intellectual property, and competition. Okay. So I'll talk about those, and then about, they have policies that were designed to stimulate investment, and then they have policies that were designed to foster impact, especially on SDG related areas. So without further ado, let's get into the policy part. All right. So, first thing that we found that these 15 countries, well, not only 15 countries, but certainly, um, many countries had was a digital strategy. All right, a digital strategy. Now, um, lots of progress has been made worldwide with respect to the adoption of digital strategies over the last 10 years. Okay, so we see that, developed countries, developing countries, and LDCs all have adopted some form of a digital strategy. That is the roadmap of how they want to develop their own digital sectors. Okay, and um, you know, you know, um, the thing though is that the content of those digital strategies tended to differ. Some of them had digital strategy that referred to national development plans and to regional strategies. Um, you know, Developed countries had 78% that align with regional strategies. Um, you know, and then, you know, developing countries had 74% that align with their national development priorities. So, and then on this side, uh, whether the digital strategies actually make reference to things like inclusivity and you know we find that a lot of them, actually do. So 97% of the developed countries, have, inclusivity contained as a major element of their digital strategies. And then a good number of them also, 86%, include environmental sustainability, a little bit lower for the developing countries. Now, what do we mean by regional digital strategies? Well, the digital strategies include, for example, in Africa, Africa Union Digital Transformation Strategy, the ASEAN Digital Master Plan for 2025, Bandar Begawan Roadmap promoting cross-border digital trade, e-commerce, digital payments, and cybersecurity, the EU Digital Decade Policy Program. All of these are basically what we mean by regional digital strategies. Now, countries can also develop, sectoral strategies as well. You know, they can be used to include missing elements of the digital strategy, and they can also respond to things like changes in technology, for example, with the advent of AI. So in a sense, these are very much moving targets. They are constantly evolving targets as well. Okay. All right. So going on. Most of these, many of the developed countries and the top 15 countries have something called a data governance framework, a good data governance framework. And it's a defining core aspect of the regulatory framework. Okay? And what do we mean by data governance? All right. It means it's a broad term that we're using to encompass data protection regulation, cybersecurity, data transfer and various localization requirements, and government access to data. All right. How do we deal with all of that? That is the broad umbrella by which we're talking about data governance. Okay. Um, Now, if we take a look at the share of countries with some laws on privacy and data protection and cybercrime by their economic grouping, we see that developed countries, 98% of them have, legislation dealing with privacy, data protection, cybercrime. The top 15 countries do very well, very, very well as well. 93% have legislation of this sort. Um, in cybercrime, 100%, all of the top 15 countries have cybercrime legislation. So they're doing quite well. On the other hand, we also see that the LDCs, the least developed countries, tend to be lagging behind in this area. The legislative framework is not necessarily complete. Yeah. Um, yeah. By the way, it should be interesting that for some of you that in those top 15 countries are included, LDCs are included in that bunch as well. Rwanda is included, for instance, right? So, with respect to data governance, right? With respect to data governance, um, currently there is no treaty that really covers data protection as such. Okay? There are voluntary standards that are hammered out by multilateral meetings, and they include, for example, the United Nations Global Digital Compact, right? Um, and then there are regional types of meetings that also, you know, seek to further data protection as well. The Council of Europe Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regard to automatic processing of data. Various bilateral regional trade and investment agreements do so. The notable exception, perhaps, is the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, Article 39, which seeks to protect undisclosed information and test data from unfair use or disclosure. Um, the goal being to ensure that it remains confidential when it has commercial value and is kept secret through reasonable efforts. All right. Um, there is a convention on cybersecurity, right? There is a convention on cybersecurity. That is the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. Um, a more recent text has now been opened for signature. It's not yet in force, called the Treaty Against Cybercrime, and then there are various regional agreements dealing with cybersecurity as well. Treaties obviously are important because if you sign and ratify a treaty, that also means that your national laws have to change to comply with that treaty. And as a result, you know, treaties serve as an important tool to help shape um, the policies for common policies with respect to and standards with respect to things like data protection, with respect to things like cybersecurity, and therefore, I think one of the things to look at with these countries is the extent to which they have signed on to these certain treaties. All right. Now, when discussing foundations, all right, one of the most important things about the foundational aspects of the regulatory environment um, is that these types of laws, having a cybersecurity law, having competition law or intellectual property law in place, itself, the goal of these things are not investment in as such. The, however, we're looking at them because the existence of these laws, at least to the investor, um, does something. It seeks to build the confidence of the investor in the host country. Okay, and that's why it's important to look at these types of laws. And in that sense, another aspect that we took a look at, especially with these 15 countries that we were examining, is competition law, or what's more commonly referred to as antitrust for some of you, right? So, when we compare competition policy measures, they typically fall into to four general areas: abusive dominance, merger control, the control of anti-competitive agreements, and the governing authority. Do they have a competition authority established by their national competition legislation? Okay. And you know, in that sense, we see that both developed and developing countries have made a fair amount of progress on that. If we look at the data between 2020 and 2024, um, here, I, competition can refer to a law that governs competition as such. The Sherman Act, for example, in the United States does that. But in the digital environment presents some very unique problems with respect to competition control. And the reason is this. I think it's useful to take a historical um, view of antitrust or competition law. These types of laws have their origins in trust busting in the United States from the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and uh, these cases that dealt with monopolies of things like railroads, right? And things like that, and that's generally where it came from. So we're talking about firms which had monopolies over certain sectors, you know. because they controlled a lot of capital, most of the money that was flowing in these sectors, and therefore exercised a lot of market control. The unique thing about the digital sector is that the amount of money that you have isn't always necessarily correlated to the amount of control you can exercise in the market. And therefore, regulating competition in the digital environment calls for a very, very different set of um, competencies, if you would, a different set of um, 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 tools, because the digital economy is comprised of things that, for example, right, um, technologies that are built on top of other technologies. You know, if you control one of these basic technologies, it's possible that you could exercise control over a market without necessarily being one of the biggest players in it. And it becomes an issue, for example, if, you know, that person, the owner of that technology, decides on a whim not necessarily license to a certain other party. You know, and therefore, the control of anti-competitive behavior in the digital realm ends up being very, very unique. The result of that is that oftentimes you will see that competition legislation, um, yes, you will see competition legislation, but you'll either see digital specific competition regulations or specific laws on the digital environment that have competition provisions built into them, right? The EU is the classic example of this. The EU is a classic example of this. They have had a long tradition of really regulating, very controlling anti-competitive behavior in the digital market. Um, the even before the DMA, which was enacted in 2022, the Digital Markets Act, they had judgments such as the Commission's 2017 fine against Google, which amounted to $2.42 billion for breaching antitrust rules by establishing market dominance as a search engine and giving an illegal advantage to its comparison shopping services, right? Um, um, yeah. So, you know, uh, there was a $746 million fine in 2021 against Amazon by Luxembourg for processing personal data in violation of EU's data protection regulation. So they have been very, very involved in this. And I think, the move in the EU was to let's make a Digital Markets Act that controls competition in this area, which is something that they came up with in 2022. And I think, going forward, for those who are worried about anti-competitive and abusive behavior in the digital environment, this is something that is going to be that you'll see more of from as we go along. The last area that I'm going to talk a little bit about is intellectual property. Intellectual property. For those of you actually working with in firms, that should come as no surprise. That should come as no surprise. The treaties that are out there with respect to intellectual property are we don't have too many actually. We've got the TRIPS agreement, obviously, which creates a floor for intellectual property protection for any aspiring member or aspiring member of the World Trade Organization. And they provide basic standards for various areas of intellectual property law. 160 some odd countries are now members of the WTO and therefore have TRIPS compliant legislation. In addition to that, there's a series of treaties that came out of WIPO when the internet first came to public view in the mid 1990s. And as a result, we call these the WIPO Internet Treaties. And they consist of two treaties, the WIPO Copyright Treaty and the WIPO Performances and Phonograph Treaty. And here we see that the developed countries have pretty much signed on to the internet treaties. The top 15 countries have signed on to these treaties, and a little bit less so for developing, and much less so for the least developed countries. Now, just to show you something. So, um, a smartphone, right? This is, well, I have an iPhone. I have an iPhone. And, you know, it's been an open question how many patents are contained in an iPhone, right? The exact number is actually unknown, but it's reported to be in the high hundreds, okay? Several hundred, yeah, but that's not the only thing that goes into an iPhone. You've got the design rights, it's nice, sleek, very usable design. You've got trademark rights that that nice little Apple mark in the back of your iPhone. You have copyright because the iOS system that iPhones use is protected by copyright. So the most basic tool for being connected is actually very, very chock full of intellectual property, which means that this is something obviously that firms who are going to be thinking about going into another country and doing business there are going to be concerned about. All right. So you know, I am going to therefore wrap up this first part of my of our lecture here. I've tried to give you a little bit of an overview of what the World Investment Report is looking at, and then what a taste of a few of the basic laws that are designed to sort of build confidence for the investor in these countries. With that, I will wrap up my part. And Georgina, I will leave you to
Thank you
to
so much,
moderate the
Yoshi.
questions.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation. For me, I learned a lot also. Especially, I keep the message of how the regulatory, like the governance frameworks, how the regulatory frameworks have an impact on investment, and also how this investment has an impact on the SDGs, and how important is that the regional and the national regulatory frameworks are mapping this investment to have an impact on the SDGs. So this is a complex system, and thank you so much for your analysis and for your research. And there is one question that was raised in the chat from Shai Shoham, asking did you include or why Saudi Arabia, to give more insights on why Saudi Arabia is among those countries that you mentioned that have,
Okay, yeah.
you know what
Yeah,
the list that
like I
you gave.
said, sure. Um, it wasn't, let me put it to you this way. We let the data speak to us. We basically let the data speak to us. So, we cross-check what the ITU said about the maturity of their regulatory environment against how much investment was going into the digital economy, right? And when we cross-check that, they came out towards the higher end of the list in those top 15 countries. All right.
Mhm.
It's not, and then what we did after that was go back and look at the actual policies that were adopted by these actual 15 countries, comparing them to what the developed countries did, what developing countries did, and what LDCs are doing, right? So that is the methodology that we followed. So in that sense, yeah, I think we just sort of let the data speak to us.
All right. Thank you so much. I don't know, Shai, if this is enough explanation. If not, please just talk to, this is open to all the participants now. We have like 10, 15 minutes for questions, for comments, for discussion. Please feel free to raise your comments or your questions. We are here for you. And these two experts, Kiyoshi and Elena, have a lot to probably contribute to your questions. So please feel free to ask. Otherwise, in the meantime, while people maybe are thinking their questions, I do have questions, but I
Okay.
don't
Yeah, 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 yeah,
take
yeah.
the time. I don't want to take the time of the attendees, so please feel interrupt me anytime. Like I will be asking questions for to make the most of this time, but the priority is for the attendees to the webinar, of course. So one of my questions for Kiyoshi is how I'm actually wondering, since the digital technology and AI in particular are global businesses, right? Like they have impact globally. Um, of course, I understand that legislation goes slower than technology most of the time, right? So we need these national or regional frameworks, legal frameworks, and then we need these treaties. But how really effective are they in a business that is most of the time global, right? I mean, how does this one thing matches with the other?
Yeah, I mean it's a fair question. Like I said, I mean I think you'll find that well, first of all, the topics that I have covered, well, the topics that I have covered in the initial set of um, policies that we're looking at are those that are more or less designed to build confidence. Okay. I think in Helena's presentation, you'll also see things about how countries, what kind of policies are they adopting to actually try to attract investment. And then finally, also what countries are doing to address specific SDG concerns. Right? So we've sort of chopped it up in these three ways. Um,
Mhm.
that having been said, you know, you know, I think if you're an investor, you know, often you're going to find it very difficult to have confidence and invest in a country that doesn't have, for example, data protection, that doesn't have cybersecurity, that will not enforce intellectual property laws, even though it may be on the books. That no country wants to be and end up as a center for cyber scams, right? And as a result of that, I think these foundational policies I think are quite important. Now, on the question of its relationship to investment, you know, again, yes, a lot of this is global, and it may beg the question, for example, does every country need a huge big data center? You know, that's something that each country sort of has to ask for itself. Yeah, yeah. Obviously, for some countries, it may make some sense, but other countries, you know, is that where you really want the money to go? If you're only like 20% connected to the internet, is that where your priority should be? Yeah. 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 Sort of these are the sort of things that I hope that, this type of report that we put out will start to elicit some thinking, you at least on from somebody who works at the UN. Right?
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if I
That's
answered your question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're this
Yeah.
is also an open discussion, and in fact, there is a question now that a couple of questions actually that are related to what you're saying. Amir is asking, what about the environmental aspects and regulations in selection of being in the top 15 countries, like the data centers, the top investment drivers, the investment attraction has a huge impact on the environment. So that's related to what you were saying about
Right, right.
data
You hear that in
centers.
in a few moments. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that
Yeah.
I guess that you just a little bit answered this question, but Kiyoshi, I don't know if you would like to comment something more on this, because this is what you were saying, right? Like really thinking about what is the strategy as countries, as regions that we want to pursue in terms of digital technology development. It's not just development, like, let's say, for the sake of it, let's say, but it's in relation to the impact of the SDGs and also how do we position ourselves in the world, right, in a
Hmm.
differentiated manner. I don't know. You obviously can answer this much better than myself.
Well, no, no. Um, it's not an easy question to answer, but yeah, I think the question on environmental aspects and regulations, yeah, certainly and I think I see in the chat the issue of greenwashing.
Mm.
I am not an environmental expert myself, and I'm probably not the best person to tell you what kind of laws need to be in place to delineate between a greenwashing and environmentally friendly and a real environmentally friendly investment. But you know um you know laws can only do so much, but from the perspective of a lawyer, I will say that laws can only do so much. They provide a basic standard which has to be met. And yes, I mean, to be very frank and honest with you, firms will look at that standard and they may game it. They may game it, they may not, but some will try to honestly, meet whatever standard and go beyond it, while others, well, they pay much more attention to, meaning the letter of the law so that they are not fined. I'm not quite sure that the law is really intended. When you have a law, whether it's intended, whether it's possible to use that law to really ferret out all those cases. I don't necessarily think that that's probably possible. The law sets a floor. It's a minimum standard that has to be met. And is if that standard raises the bar, then there will have been some effect, from my view. But yeah.
Right. That's a very good point. Because then there is another question. I was thinking about that too while you were talking. So it seems that we're all aligned here from Abinet Nayar. Okay, he's saying, did you have any thoughts about digital taxation as a regulatory category? And how does this be maybe contradicting or helping for the development needs of the region? So this is the like the ongoing discussion, like for example in Europe we have more regulation. Is this stopping investment in digital technology in the region? Is more regulation positive, negative? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think Helena's part will also touch on taxation a bit. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So I'll leave that more to Helena. You know, I think there's always this tension, I think, in this sector that of um, you know regulation in general and the freedom to operate. And I think that probably comes from the culture a little bit of those who are working in the digital sectors. Um, You know, that having been said, I think, government is acutely aware that governments are usually acutely aware that, there are needs that need to be balanced. Do they always get it right? Probably not. But it's their role to be thinking about that balance. And I think the laws that you see on the books um probably reflect that. And I probably and taxation is also on the list of those laws that has that's up there in terms of this huge debate. And I don't think there's really an answer to this debate, and I don't think I won't try to answer that one if you don't mind.
Yeah, all this in the end, as you say, is like, of course, it has to be in alignment with the strategy of the region, the strategy of the country, right? The goals, the national
Mhm,
goals, and
mhm,
also even the culture, right? In Europe, we have a different
mhm.
culture from the United States, from Africa, from Asia. So there are a lot of things that come into play. And now there is another question from Vanessa Chan that is asking about what is the trend that you think that is heading in relation to AI legal responsibility and capacity? It's true that capacity building is also in the legislation, right? And it's a very important topic too, because in the end, um, the regulation, as you say, is a floor, but then are the young people, are the entrepreneurs, are the companies prepared to go above that floor? So, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Yeah. The first thing to be to keep in mind is that we've already got a digital divide. And so the ability of some countries to access AI is going to be different from other countries to be able to access AI. And that's obviously going to have an effect on, a country's ability to actually benefit from AI as it develops as a technology. Second thing I think to know about regulations and AI is that because it's such a new technology, because it is such a new technology, there is no consensus yet. And the classic example of this is IP, right? How do you treat the training data for AI? Is it proprietary? If so, for whom? How do you treat the outputs from AI in terms of proprietary, right? In terms of IP rights? Yeah. Do we give rights because somebody writes a good prompt? You know, you know, these are all unanswered questions. Yes, various courts are moving in various directions, but if you ask me whether there is any consensus, no, there is not any consensus yet. You know, um, so it's still very, very much moving, and I think this it's not unheard of for a brand new technology. Let me put it to you this way. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And you're highlighting another topic, right? Which is the knowledge gap between policymakers and researchers and actually the people who are building the technology. It's difficult to regulate and to
Right.
and to promote capacity building when things are changing so fast that it's
That's right.
difficult to keep up, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right. Mhm.
right. So we have time for one last question for Kiyoshi. If there is one last question from the audience. Um, Otherwise, we will proceed to Elena's Afonso. And before that, I would like to ask Kiyoshi if you have any last comments, recommendations, or
No, I'm fine. Again, thanks, Georgina. Well, I think you've given us the opportunity to speak, and uh, yes. By the way, the slides will be shared. I will send a PDF of our slides to you and you, Macau, after the workshop, so you'll be able to access that. All right, great.
right. And also, the session is being recorded. So we will also make the session available through you and you Macau. so that you also have the explanations and the comments, not just the slides. So I want to also thank Kiyoshi and Elena for this, for your availability, for sharing the result of your research. I know it's been a long way to do all this, to do this report, and it's very valuable for us to understand all these insights that are often not tackled, right? As we commented at the beginning. So I think that this is really, really helpful for all the audience from you Macau and AI digital technology in general, because as we're saying, investment affects the SDGs, obviously, policy making, but also research. For researchers, we depend on investment, right? For the people that are working on any area that has to do for entrepreneurs, obviously for policymakers, but for anybody that is working on digital technology, all our work is sustained by money, right? At the end, by investment. So it's very important to know what's happening in that field. So thank you very much again. So now I will give the floor to Elena to continue the explanation. And afterwards, again, we will have a few minutes, 15 minutes for Q&A and for comments. Elena, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation with you today. I'm very happy that people are anticipating the topics we're going into the second part. So that's excellent. I hope I can shed some light on how we think about these topics, environment, taxation, but also others. So let me just put the presentation. I'll share it right now. So I believe you are seeing the presentation. I'll make it bigger. Okay, there we go. Right. So I'll be talking about these last two topics. We call them stimulating investment and fostering impact. So Kiyoshi has talked to you about what we think are the some foundational regulatory, legal, and institutional measures that are have to be in place in order to attract and leverage FDI. Right, that's our focus, is on policies to attract FDI. So now going into some investment specific legislation and regulation. So one thing to consider is if foreign investment can enter a country at all. What happens is, so on developing countries, first, let's look at that side. They tend to regulate, the entrance of foreign investment through foreign equity restrictions. What does this mean? This means that in certain sectors of the economy, investors have, for example, limits as to how much capital they can own in a company. In other countries, sometimes there are joint venture requirements. And very often, there are also bans of foreign investment in certain sectors. This is common, for example, in defense, for example, in currency minting, of course, and some others. So what we see is developing countries, they make use of these restrictions, and they also make use of licensing and permitting, right? So they require, they have these requirements to have a license to operate, right? To have a permit. And these are a bit some broad tools because they affect all investors. So this is for FDI in general. In terms of FDI into digital sectors, what we observed is that developing countries are quite more restrictive in terms of letting foreign investment in, then developed countries. So we have this image here on the right. This is data from the OECD FDI Regulatory Restrictiveness Index. They created this very helpful database and index where they went through the restrictions that countries have and sort of attributed a ranking. And computing those numbers and focusing on these 4 sectors, which we think are more linked to the digital economy. That's telecommunications, media, manufacturing of electrical components, and manufacturing of computer and other electrical products. We see that the top 15 countries, so in general, developing countries being more restrictive, you see, if the number is higher, that means more restrictions, right? So developing being much more restrictive than developed, which is the gray bar. And among developing, our most, let's call it advanced developing countries, the ones that have a more mature policy framework for the digital economy, they're less restrictive, right? Another interesting observation is to see which sectors are more closed to foreign investment, and that's telecommunications and media by far, as you can see. So this is for developing countries. For developed countries, they also control the entrance of foreign investment in the digital economy, but they do it in a different way. They operate more through investment screening for national security purposes. And we can see in this image that we have here, this is data we compiled. I'll just make a side note to say that we have this investment policy database. So we have a team at UNCTAD that tracks investment or new policies that governments adopt that affect investment, right? This is online and can easily be found with this name. So we looked at digital policy measures regarding the entrance of FDI, and you can see how developed countries in recent years, right, 2020 to 2024, they have adopted many measures regarding investment screening. In developing countries, you can see how they opt more for those entry requirements, right, those permitting requirements. So this is an interesting difference in tools. And so what we see with developed countries is with the advent of AI and these advanced technologies that pose new security risks, the concept of national security has broadened. And while before it focused on traditional defense sectors, so that investment would be screened, now there's more investments being screened, and namely by what we saw in our research is that among developed countries that we could find data for, from all the investment projects that they screened for national security purposes, 30 to 60% of them were in the digital sector. Okay, so this is going to be an important share, and that governments are being very attentive to this foreign investment coming into their countries. Our recommendation is for countries, if they do want to opt for foreign equity restrictions, to measure that against their strategic objectives, right? If we want to develop the sector, but the sector is closed or hard to enter from a legal standpoint, right? There's something to consider there. So we help countries with these considerations, and always with safeguarding, of course, their national security, their public interest. And one thing we really think is beneficial for countries is to be clear and transparent in whatever restrictions that exist, because sometimes there's no clarity, so an investor that wants to come in to a country and really it's unclear if they can come in and in under what terms. So this is on entrance. Now, going into what we call investment promotion and facilitation. And starting with facilitation, we call investment facilitation measures when governments put in place policies to make it easier to establish and operate businesses, right? So for a foreign investor to have a smoother investment journey. Some examples we have seen in the digital world are, governments making it easier to obtain a license for digital infrastructure, when governments prepare documents where they explain how their screening works. Because for investors, we know predictability and transparency are important. We've also seen governments streamline, for example, business registration and other bureaucratic procedures for startups, for data centers, for semiconductors, right? If they want to promote an investor, they streamline those procedures. They can also and often do support investors with obtaining their visas. Sometimes they create special visas for investment, for tech workers. We'll see more about that later. And sometimes they also provide matchmaking services with local talent. That's when an investor needs local services, and being new to the region, perhaps, right, new to the country, it's good for countries to facilitate this, to help with this matchmaking. So really, the goal of these measures are to help investors navigate regulations and even culture, right? That can be quite different. And often they do this also with the use of e-government tools that they may already have. We help countries establish some of these tools. For example, business registration portals, right? Being able to open a business from your computer, right? And have all the documents be digital and certified. So this is an important tool for governments to speed up and facilitate investment. On this facilitation side, we've also seen countries creating techno parks, right? So these areas designated for technological companies. And the goal here is to create an ecosystem for collaboration. They also have this other tool, regulatory sandboxes. The goal here is to enable companies to test products in a controlled environment from a regulatory standpoint. And this helps, with decreasing the risk for companies. And we see in our most advanced developing countries, that this top 15 we're talking about, that they make use of this, for example, in fintech, telecommunications, and digital technologies. So going to promotion, right? Here, we just wanted to call attention for the role of investment promotion agencies. We work a lot with them because, as you can imagine, they're the prime institution in government to attract foreign investment, and they are important also for investment in the digital economy. There's things that they can do. They can bridge information gaps and promote the comparative advantage of the country in terms of the investment opportunities that are available, right? So of course, investors can do their homework and find this out, but governments can also have it nice and ready in a brochure, in a website, and have this research already done, and they do this. They facilitate processes, again, business registration, visas, and things like that. And if an investor wants to expand their operations, they can also help with all the legal regulatory part. They also, because they're so in contact with investors, they can channel their concerns into the other ministries, other parts of government, in order to, advocate for some policy changes that the private sector would like to see. So they can convey that into government. And they can also ensure that the investment that they promote, that the country wants to come into the country, is matches the country's national strategy for their own development and some sectoral strategy, say for digital, if that exists. So they can do a lot for attracting FDI in the digital economy. However, what we found in our research is that in developing countries, IPAs are still a bit, let's say, underused in this regard. We conducted a survey the IPAs all over the world, and what we saw was that in developing countries, they're not their national digital strategies don't really have a role for IPAs. They're not really in the design of these involved in the design of these development strategies. When they do promote investment in the digital economy, it's often the core infrastructure, the internet, the fiber optic cables, for example, or ICT manufacturing. It's these traditional sectors, and they're not so much promoting other new digital economy activities, like fintech, like e-commerce, the sharing economy apps, Uber, Airbnb, and such. There are many. And this is in contrast in developed countries to their IPAs are strong in this, and they are promoting investment in semiconductors, electronic equipment, fintech, robotics, AI. So they're actively interacting with investors in this regard. So there's a role to go here. Right. So we'd like to talk as well about this other set of policies to sort of shape the impact of the investment, right? So one set of policies that countries are using are digital content regulations. The digital content, there's twofold. There's two objectives with these regulations. One is to create a safer and more accountable online environment. That's to prevent terrorism and cybercrime. That's to regulate advertising and influencer activity. They aim at enhancing the transparency in AI algorithms. These regulations, they try also to determine content liability for the digital platforms, right? And so there's this aspect of safety. Another very interesting aspect of having local content regulations is to help develop domestic creative industries. And here, some measures we've seen are, for example, streaming platforms being required to invest a share of their local revenue in national or regional productions. We've also seen, for example, local content quotas. For example, in Nigeria, 60% of content that's directed to the Nigerian market must be locally produced, right? They also tie the licensing of broadcasting firms to the local content that they show. So there's some very interesting developments here. You can see in developed countries, in both developed and developing countries, the focus has been on moderating content. That's where most measures have been adopted, and some measures regarding creating an authority to deal with this content moderation. And in mostly developed countries, this obligation to have local content is also there. Now we just wanted to alert for some challenges, which is of these regulations that countries need to think about is one, having reduced content, right, from being more restrictive, is increasing the costs of production, right? And then this has an impact on competition and on innovation in the country, and potentially on these regulations conflicting with international commitments, namely in World Trade Organization agreements. These are some things to think about, but so generally what we advise countries is, if they're going to opt for local content requirements, to it should be different in different markets. A bigger market might consider those quotas, those reinvestment obligations, but a smaller market, maybe they want mostly to attract the content creation, and so there the correct policies might be more towards incentives, could be tax incentives, or could be support to produce this content, and co-produce it even with local firms. So going on to taxation, this was mentioned before. So the way we see it, or the way tax authorities see it, is that the digital economy actually is very challenging. It's very challenging because traditional tax frameworks, they're based on the principle of territoriality, which links taxable persons and taxable events to specific jurisdictions. But digital services, they can be delivered across borders. And so this complicates the assessing where value was created, where profit should be allocated, and which obligations are thus due. And without wanting to be technical, but this opens the door to a big problem called base erosion and profit shifting, which is when multinational companies essentially shop around for the best rates regarding corporate income taxes. The other problem in the digital economy is distortions between the taxation of digital and non-digital businesses. What do we see? We see that in developed countries, they have digital economy specific taxes. They are active in this field. 84%, as you can see from the figure, have these taxes, but only a quarter of LDCs and 2/5 of developing countries have begun to even think about how to tax these new economic activities. Now, our most advanced, more mature, let's say, more mature developing countries have some things in place. What we saw is they're adapting their corporate income tax legislation to have rules on if e-commerce or digital income is local or not. So they're going into that and creating those rules. They are requiring non-resident digital providers to register for paying value-added tax. They are creating something called digital services tax. They are also making use of something called the significant economic presence rule. So our policy recommendation is for countries to move forward in looking into the taxation of this field. Again, in order not to create distortions, in order to keep up with other jurisdictions in the world. It's important, though, to build capacity in tax administrations, because they're also learning and it's also new. Just wanted to show you as well the side of incentives. Of course, we're talking about attracting FDI incentives, right, and are very important. And here we're talking about fiscal and financial. Developing countries make more use of tax incentives, fiscal, and developed countries more on financial. And some things we see here are, incentives for startups, deductions for research and development activities, support for angel investors. So in terms again of tax breaks and financial schemes for developing telecommunications in remote areas. Moving on to the environment. What we see here is there's a way to go in terms of even assessing what the damage is from ICT and from the digital economy, right? From having those metrics, those measurements that then inform regulation. We see many impacts in terms of resources being depleted, high energy, water use. If we think, for example, data centers and these high computing activities, electronic waste, which is a growing global concern. So we know this exists, but what we see is developing countries aren't integrating it into their digital strategies. Only half have environmental concerns in there, opposed to 86% of developed countries. When it is mentioned, it's very broad, and there's no specific metrics. So it's really incipient, the thinking here. Now, there is some cause for optimism. So even though most countries, what they rely on is the existing environmental framework that they already have for environmental protection, right? And countries have this. Some again are most developed countries. They have e-waste rules, okay? Many actually. So if there's some environmental legislation regarding digital, it will be e-waste. And this is, for example, extending the responsibility of producers regarding the product that they have produced, namely taking it back in, creating collection centers, putting in place import bans of e-waste. We see governments collaborating inside themselves or between ministries. For example, the ICT regulatory body talking with the Ministry of the Environment regarding e-waste, right? Because this is a topic that concerns both, and so we're seeing growing collaboration intra-government. And because data centers are growing exponentially, countries are keeping up, and they are creating policies to protect their resources, namely water conservation targets, incentivizing alternative cooling that's not so dependent on water, energy efficiency targets, integrating renewable energy, and having incentives for companies to do this, and having construction standards. So we're seeing some movement in this regard. It's still at early stages, we would say. One final set of policies I wanted to leave you here is in terms of skills and linkages. So to attract FDI, of course, investors are attracted by an existing pool of digital skills, but at the same time, foreign investors can, through knowledge transfer, contribute to that pool of digital skills. So it's a virtuous cycle can be created here, which can be beneficial for countries. And so to kickstart this, some initiatives that we have seen are in place is to create digital nomad visas, right? It's for non-residents to be able to come in and work. You have tech visas, to have those skilled professionals reside in the country and have that fast track into the country. This is very important for developing countries, right? That are missing these skills. And countries are also setting up partnerships with foreign education institutions in order to improve the digital skills available. They partner with private companies, with trainee programs. They support AI trainings. And we also see a big role in the diaspora. They are tapping into those skilled professionals abroad, and even investors, that have a connection to the country. And so they are creating programs to, establish those links between the people on the outside and the inside, and increase investment and skills development. Another set of policies on linkages, right? That's linking foreign companies with domestic companies. And here, what we see countries doing are business-to-business events in the digital sector. Countries, especially IPAs, they often keep these databases of local companies, and create platforms to access these databases, which then creates a matchmaking between the foreigners and locals. Often they also do case-by-case matchmaking. And sometimes they create a whole development zones for the technology companies, right? They designate the space, some incentives for tech companies to be there and to connect with local companies. And finally, they also, of course, work with governments in other countries to have linkages between companies in the digital sector. So this concludes the policies I wanted to show you, and as a means to wrap up, our thinking, our policy recommendations for attracting international investment in the digital economy. We think, number one, it's important to think long term, to have that vision, to have that strategy built, and then to be open, of course, but balance it with national security and public interests. It's important to strengthen regulatory frameworks, which are not built for they were not built with these new technologies in mind. It's important to update them, strengthen them to new developments, to bet on and improve the role of the investment promotion agencies. They can do a lot to bring in investment in digital. Of course, also promote and develop human capital in digital, and have always in mind that foreign investors can help develop those skills in the country. And finally, it's important for developing countries to participate when international rules are being made and decided. So this, in a gist, is our views, and thank you for your time, and we're interested in hearing your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Elena, for this very insightful presentation. I'm learning so much. I just noted things that really surprised me, how the regulations are moving forward on things like e-waste or digital nomad visas, and also partnering with foreign education institutions. All these are things that on the one side are necessary, also exciting. They are more aligned with how the digital economy and the digital technology works, right? So there are some, please, again, I encourage all the participants to write, to make your questions through either the chat or the Q&A window that we have here. We have a few questions at the Q&A window that were partially answered through the chat before. But I will raise them again also because I'm not sure we covered them entirely. In the Q&A, there was again a question from Amir asking about the environmental impact, also for the 15 countries that Kiyoshi made reference to. But maybe, Elena, you would like to elaborate a little bit more Because of course we want to attract these investments, right, as countries and regions, but at the same time, and this is the complicated part also, it's to link it with the SDGs, right? So we want investment, but for the SDGs. So obviously that can only be done if you have a very strong strategy that links taxation, that links regulatory framework. But any other thoughts that you want to make that express on this environmental impact?
Yes. So, us at the UN, as you said, we want development, we want economic growth, but of course, sustainable development for people and the planet. And so we're very attentive to the protections that countries need to have to protect their resources, right? To protect their environment. And countries do have a right to regulate as much as investors have their rights and their protections when they come in. There's also um, the floor that Kiyoshi was saying of legal protections, right? For example, having any investment, not any investment, then it depends, but investments requiring an environmental impact study, feasibility study, and then to be certified by government. This of course slows down the investment process. It's not a restriction, but certainly it doesn't make it smoother, but it's important, and it has to be there. Now, as I mentioned in the presentation, this is it's regarding digital, we are at early stages. So what countries are doing, they're really using the rules they have currently to protect their, water resources or their forests or, their environmental assets. And there might be loopholes. They often they are a very old legislation that can be taken advantage of. And so we're optimistic, though. We think the digital transition that countries need to go through and want to go through, and the green transition that they also have to and want to go through, right, with the use of low carbon energy, these can be linked, these can be reinforced. We can really have like benchmarks, right, for the digital sector and how much power they can use, the water and emissions, and at the same time incentivize them to come in and use renewable energy, and be efficient in their energy use. So give incentives for those, to bet on circular economy, right? For companies to be mindful of their product in that holistic way. We think there's space here to, for one to build on the other, the digital and the green. So there's
This is
hope.
super interesting. I don't want to say niche because it's a very economic, but it's a very interesting way forward, right? Like the circular, green, and digital, so much to explore there, really. And there is a question from Elizabeth saying, does UNCTAD have the initiative on capacity build? So if there are going to be like any workshops or anything like people could join on FDI for the digital economy. If you're planning to do more on this,
Well, I think we'd like to. This is a topic that we explored recently with the launch of this report, the World Investment Report 2025. Um, we will be working with a few countries, actually over the next 4 years, into precisely doing this, looking into their policies, and seeing how they can attract more foreign investment into digital specifically. Now, workshops like this, we really just have this one planned as far as I know, but we can, think about more in the future.
Yeah, definitely. If there is demand, and I encourage, by the way, Elizabeth and all the other, I'm mentioning Elizabeth because she's the attendee that is mentioning this question. All the other attendees to contact Kiyoshi, to contact Elena, if you're interested in establishing lines of collaboration for research, if your research is related to this area of expertise, don't hesitate to step forward to reach out and to mention these initiatives. Elizabeth is saying, I would appreciate Tanzania to be included. I'm interested for collaboration.
Yes, yes, we can bilaterally discuss for sure. Um, uh, it's great to have your interest, and maybe we can build on it. And for all the researchers out there, which I think are also in the audience, I think there are many research opportunities here. I don't know if you spotted them throughout the presentation, but I'll just say in general that we're focused on the policies and advising governments, but it's not the causation isn't very clear between a certain policy and its impact. There's work in every direction that you can think of regarding this. So I hope we can spark some interest, some ideas, and then we could work together, because we really don't go into this impact part, quantitatively, as can be done. So yeah.
Definitely, this is such a huge area of research, right? And while you were talking, I made here a drawing of how the UN research teams, we are kind of like a convener, right? Like in between people, between the government needs, the research that is being done in academia and in industry, the investment in the digital economy, and we can make like the links. We're trying to make the links to make all this work towards the SDGs, and this is a very rewarding research, but there are so many opportunities. So Elizabeth is asking, I believe, for your email, Elena. I don't know if you can provide it, or I don't know how you want to proceed to contact each other. It's up to you, ladies.
Yes, I think because I have hers, I think I can just email her. So I'm taking note of it.
Okay, that's great.
This is
Thank you,
perfect.
Elena, and thank you, Elizabeth. I'm so happy that already one potential collaboration is sparking as a result of this. Um, so any other there are a couple more questions on the Q&A that were more related to the previous discussion, but maybe Elena also you want to comment on it. Did you have any thoughts about digital taxation? It's again talking about taxation and the attractiveness. Like this is of course this topic. You mentioned it a little bit before, right? How to link it in a way that it's kind of like well, I don't know, I'll let you discuss it because you're the expert. So
Mhm. Yeah, in taxation, I see here there's the question about attractiveness, right? And again, is taxation attractive? Taxation is a need, right? Uh, Governments need to fund themselves, and what we see is investors, they mostly need that predictability, that security, that transparency. And so often our work is to go into countries and point out the sometimes contradictions in the legislation, sometimes lack of transparency. Right, and for example, one work we do is to create these business information portals, right? To make it so that someone that wants to invest in a certain country can find in one place everything they need from a regulatory standpoint, all the rules that apply to them, and have that be very clear and transparent. So we opt more to we think that's where the focus should be, and definitely yes, digital taxation is a new category, relatively new, but it's developing fast as these services are crossing borders and growing so fast, and countries are on their way. It's developing. It's also a bit of a global conversation, right? Because companies do sort of compare countries, and countries on their side also try to have some coordination of their tax policies. But as I showed, developed countries way ahead into taxing these digital companies, the least developed countries way behind, very few, and then our most mature developed countries, right, have certain taxation in place, but two-fifths, so two out of every five, only two out of every five developing countries have digital economy specific taxes. We're advancing, the world advances, but it's not very fast. So something
And
to
then
keep
there's
Mhm.
thanks, Elena. Then there is a last question in the Q&A that has to do with digital colonialism, right? And this is something that we all have very much in mind, like how this investment, what is it funding, right? We all want what the so-called developing countries to lead, right? To have, and you said how important it is for all of us around the world to participate, to have a seat at the table, a fair seat at the table, and
Mhm.
to lead, not only to incorporate. And
Mhm.
so, do you have any comments on this from the point of view of, investment policy making?
Exactly. This is why we emphasize so much having a vision. So instead of going with what are current trends and the flow, actually, so what we see is in countries that have developing countries that are more digitally advanced, digitally connected, they had a strategy early on. They're the ones who, planned ahead decades ago. They already had a digital development strategy, right? And many countries are only thinking about it now. So we emphasize, national ownership of countries of their development agenda. So it's up to, the stakeholders in the country, and that's government, that's also academia, that's civil society, right? That's the private sector. So having all interested parties meet, deliberate, and really strategize into, okay, what's important to us, what are our strengths, vis-a-vis other countries in the region, in the world, um, and really build that strategy, which then will inform the regulation, right? So regulation will follow those priorities that are set. And governments do this. They have national development plans that they follow, and so here the important thing is to have one for digital too.
Right. Thank you so much. Here we realized how important like the brain power is for all of us, right? To have a clear strategy. Um, and so thank you so much. Do you have any final comment, Elena, to close the session?
I first of all to thank you for this opportunity for us to share this work we did, um, and that we will continue to develop. And thank you to the participants for your interest. As I said, I think there is much to do both in thinking of new policy measures and what are the best policy measures. And in order to advise countries on what the best is, we need research. that is guided by principles of sustainable development. This is very niche, and it's something that UNU can help. And we look forward to collaborating further. Yeah.
Right. There is a final question from Elizabeth about what is the impact on digital economy on the strategies on the SDGs 2030, which I think this is like kind of like the big question that we all want to answer, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I would just say that they need to be coherent, right? These are two agendas. One, SDGs 2030, that's a global agenda that countries are, all trying to adhere to and implement. And when they look into the steps that they need to take nationally, domestically, that's where these we call them sectoral strategy, right? So digital economy strategy, but also, green transition strategy. It's very complicated work actually, but in theory, the strategies need to be at least coherent, if not supported and reinforcing one another. But there should be coherence between, international commitments, international goals, which then get translated to regional goals, even thinking here of the African Union, and then down to the national level, which is informed by these international objectives. But again, there must be national ownership of the priorities set in there, and that's really what's going to have the strategy be successful, even if it's nationally owned, nationally determined, right? Informed by what the rest of the world is doing, but very, very supported internally with political will, right? And hopefully some resources too.
All right. Thank you so much, Elena. This was a really insightful session. I'm super excited also to start more research in this area. And all the participants in the audience, please reach out to Kiyoshi, to Elena, to myself. Like from the UNU, we have to work more on these lines of work and collaborate more intensively, because really this is key, right, for sustainable development and the digital economy, how the digital can contribute to sustainable development. So thank you so much again, Kiyoshi and Elena. It was an honor and a privilege to hear all your insights of all this hard work to produce the World Investment Report that I recommend everybody to read. And if you don't have any more comments, I would thank also all the participants for your very, very interesting questions that has helped us like unfold a little bit more the discussion. And we will keep in touch and we will follow up on all these topics.
Yeah. For my part, I would like to also thank Georgina for moderating this workshop. We only met this past summer, but I think we have been able to initiate a very productive relationship between UNU Macau and UNCTAD. Georgina was actually just here in Geneva, by the way, and talking to us about the AI policy simulator that she's working on. That garnered a huge amount of interest at our end. So I think we hope that this is just the beginning of a line of communication and possibly action between our two institutions. And of course, we're very grateful that you have provided us this opportunity to be able to present some of the findings from our 2025 World Investment Report. We'll obviously be following up with that with various types of activities. Hopefully, more technical assistance on FDI and the digital economy, and ways to make it work for governments around the world. So it leaves me to thank our hosts, our kind hosts at UNU Macau, for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will see you soon and we will follow it. Let's keep in touch.
Okay, great.
Have a
Thank you.
nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.